Okay. Hi, everybody. How are you? It's I think it's 12 noon. Hope everybody's doing well. And I know we'll have what was great is we have like 2 weeks of looking at the future here, and we're pretty lucky to have Representative Sean Garballey with us. Chair Garballey, I introduced him some time ago, and I know Maura's introduced him before, but I just want to remind people how essential he's been historically in our field, but it's, turning 22 historically big time. But then in addition to that, this year, he had a couple of home runs, which are nothing to be shy about, right? And one was the Historical Commission, which was unbelievable. And then on top of that was Macy. And that's really the college program, the first one in the country to get formally, basically formally integrated right into the school systems and upper higher education. So it's huge. And just really appreciate all you do historically, fighting for healthcare equity, fighting for, let's not forget Nikki's Law and, other things like that we've been successful with. So, and you're here along with Maura Sullivan, Senior Director of Government Affairs and Health Equity, so which is great.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the future. And I'm going to make Carrie Mahoney our co-host here. So
I just want to chime in, Leo, to say also Representative Garballey has been just an incredible champion for our current bill in the informal session, which is supported decision making. And we really needed him coming up to the end here. So fingers crossed for that. But thank you. Rep.
Yeah. And let me let you say a few words. Welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us, Chair Garballey, and excited. So go ahead.
Well, I'm ecstatic to be here. As always, Leo, I can't say enough good things about what the ARC stands for and the people who work for the ARC, Maura being certainly one of the best advocates in this building and being able to get bills passed, and how hard she works. And I'm laughing a little bit because we're talking about next session. And she's working to get a couple of more bills done between now and the end of the holidays before we take the oath of office on January 4th. That being the decision-making bill and, of course, the public records bill that would really give a lot of teeth to the commission you alluded to, Leo, on the history of state institutions in our Commonwealth. But I have a lot to be happy about this session. You mentioned the inclusive concurrent enrollment program that we partnered on. There's so many people on this call that worked so hard on Macy. And, for those who don't know, Macy had been around for about 10 years. That was codified in the state budget, but not in law. So it could be changed at any moment during difficult fiscal times. And it wasn't nearly all of public colleges in the Commonwealth.
Right.
And so now it is in statute, it is in our law. And it's something we can all be proud of because we worked on it literally for over a decade. And it is important that in law, and I always tear up when I talk about this, but in law, now that no student with an intellectual disability can be denied admittance into a public higher education institution in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts solely due to that individual's disability. And that's a big deal. And, that's something that we've all been working for. And I bring that up because the ARC, through Maura, through Leo, through Charlie, you have been the ones in the weeds on all of these bills, doing the work, going from rep office to rep office, Senate office to Senate office, getting this done. And I just saw our friend Anna going door to door on the decision-making bill.
Yep.
So these things don't happen by accident, and
Right.
they happen because of the advocates who are in the field because of constituents working hard to get something passed. And that is why we have a lot to celebrate this session. Hopefully we'll have a lot more to celebrate in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll get back to work next session.
It's funny you mentioned, the informal, right? So we had a meeting with Chair Finn the other day. And of course, Maura didn't let that slide by without talking about the, piece of the Historical Commission, right? Moving that language for the folks that we can't get records access for. So obviously we talked about a lot of stuff, as you can imagine. But he was saying anything else. And well, now that you mentioned it, since the session's not over yet, what do you think? And are you taking the temperature there? And we know it's tough to take the temperature, right? Because these things get discussed in caucus, right? And get discussed, I'm sure, with the minority leader as well, in terms of what's doable during an informal session.
Mm-hmm.
And let's start with that, even though we're going to look at the coming year. And it's really important to look at the coming year because the legislature's changing a bit, maybe not as drastically as 3 sessions ago, when I think there was 40 new reps, right, entering the building, but still, is it 22 at least new reps, if I remember right? Might even be 24 new House members, but still, that's quite a few. But let me ask you, things may happen, right? Informal, it may happen in the very last day. Are people discussing, how does that work, to give people a feel about that without giving away any secrets?
It's a great question, and maybe if I knew, we would be getting all these bills passed. There certainly is an internal conversation on what can be passed, what should be passed between now and the end of session, and that's coming up in the next 10 days or so. And what makes this more complicated than if it wasn't already complicated enough is we have a new governor being sworn into office on the 5th of January, right? So a lot of what is being discussed is, should we give the new administration time to vet these pieces of legislation and to kind of put their fingers on the pulse or their stamp on pending legislation. At the same time, a lot of these bills, like decision-making, like the public records bill, have been vetted for a long time. Or the hospital training bill, we've been working on these things through the hard work of Maura and you, Leo, and the advocates for the ARC have been working on this for a long time. So it's not like, we're just looking at this bill for the first time. These are things that have been vetted for years. And so that's why we're trying to get them passed, even though we only have 10 days or so left of this session. But I think I don't want to speak for leadership, but leadership is looking at bills and with our partners in the Senate on what can get passed. The Senate has already passed the decision-making bill, which is my hope that makes it an easier conversation and being able to get it passed by the House and sent to Governor Baker before he, does his lonely walk out to the Boston Common. But a lot of that remains to be decided.
Thanks for answering that. And I won't push any more on that.
We're ready to go. Reps are, we have, like you said, we have around 21 new reps who got elected. They're getting sworn in on the 4th. They're ready to go. They're getting legislation ready. And folks who are on this call, if you have ever thought that your vote didn't matter, if you ever thought about skipping an election, one of these state rep races up in the Essex district was decided by 1 vote.
And that was former rep, or about to be former rep, Lenny Mira, am I right?
Former rep Lenny Mira lost his election by 1 vote. I think it's going to go to the court, but 1 vote.
Pretty crazy, yeah. And it was a switch, right, when they did the recount, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. I think Lenny was up by 11 or 12 votes. And then when the recount happened, he was down by 1.
Wow. So, and this is the time of year too, that people start talking about what bills to file sometimes, though January will be the big month, right, for that. But what do you think when you're looking at the legislature, there obviously was a big change when Speaker Mariano assumed the chair, right? And there was many, things changed, right? People's chairs moved around a bit, right? As they're bound to be. Do you think with 20-something new House members coming in, that what kind of impact would that have at the 160 members that exists from your perspective as someone who's been there now very long time, and has seniority and has seen things change a few times?
Well, certainly we have a younger class coming in. They're excited to get started. They are filled with their own priorities around climate change and transportation and people with disabilities. And so, we're really looking forward to engaging with them on, dealing with the issues of the day. And, you did allude to, Leo, the last time we had a change a couple of years ago, the committees were changed, right? Because we elected a new speaker in Ron Mariano, who has just done a really outstanding job as the steward of the House. We call him the first among equals, right? In the House of Representatives. It's up to him on how he wants to propose changes to the committees and his leadership team and his chairs and vice chairs. There are many vacancies, right? We have a majority leader. Claire Cronin became the ambassador to Ireland under Joe Biden, appointed by Joe Biden. So that is a vacancy that needs to be filled. We have, a assistant majority leader with our good friend Joe Wagner from Chicopee, decided not to run for re-election. So that's a position that needs to be filled. I think there's a bunch of chairmanship positions, several vice chairmanship positions. So whenever there's vacancies, there's always changes, because remember, as reps get appointed to these positions, other reps get appointed to those vacant positions that happen. But historically, that doesn't necessarily change the body.
Yeah.
And 21 new reps won't necessarily change the body from where it is now or where it has been. Now, it is a tremendous change from where we were 10 years ago and where we are now, but you might not see a massive change between this session and next session. But remember, historically, committees and those decisions don't come until around February. Mm-hmm. So there is some waiting to go between now and then. But what's really going to make some changes, right, is it's not every session where we elect a new governor. Yeah. Right. So Maura Healey, our governor-elect, Kim Driscoll, our lieutenant governor-elect, will be taking the oath of office on the 5th. And they are already making their decisions known on very critical, administrative positions. That will continue, I believe, the next week or two. So that will certainly change, the way, we do business, because we work closely with the administration. And so there'll be changes that way early on.
Yeah, good point.
Rep, I'm glad to hear you say you're excited about the new, the freshmen coming in this year, because I don't know if you saw my email, but we're hoping you'll talk to them on January 10th at 10 o'clock. Okay. We'll be doing our new legislator orientation, and that is an opportunity for us to really educate the incoming legislature on, what the ARC does, but honestly jump them right into what are our priorities. And I know in the past, you've been really good about getting new legislators to connect with me and, hear one-to-one what we need them for. But we also want them to know we're a resource for them as well, and that their constituents may need us. And so for them to be able to reach out. So
that's great to hear, Maura. I have not seen that email, but okay. I was actually going to suggest that you do a sort of, new legislator orientation. And I'll tell you why that's so important, right? When you are a new rep, just if you're a rep in general, okay, it can be chaotic. It can be, difficult balancing different issues, different priorities. If you are a newly elected rep, right, and you are coming into state government for the first time, it is literally like taking water from a fire hose, because everyone is bombarding you with important issues, right? Economic development, public safety, senior citizen issues, higher education, K through 12 education, right? 50% of our budget is in the area of health and human services, right? But not always our reps make these areas a priority. And so having an orientation is important to educate them on the major issues coming before us and the human service community, talking about 257, talking about the different issues. And it's important to let them know that you, Maura and Leo, of the ARC are a resource to them. But it's also critical because we need champions, right? It is great to have supporters, right? It's great to have people who will vote for our issues, will testify for our issues, and really help them through the legislative process. But, we don't just want people who are going to sign on to our bills, right? We don't just want people who are going to sign on to our amendments. We want legislators who are going to speak up, who are going to be champions,
Right.
For our bills and for our causes. And this, having an orientation is really, really helpful and important and help making that become a reality.
And it's a good opportunity for us to follow up and assess, did they hear us? I'm going to ask you two, based on this topic. I'm dying to get both your responses to this question. It's not a trick one, thankfully. So, and that is, what's the most, stark experience you've had trying to talk about this area, and it could be broader. It doesn't have to be just about IDD. It can be about disability services or human services in general, that you've been talking to a legislator about, that you were surprised at what they didn't know. Okay. I don't mean they weren't interested and, they had to run off, which happens sometimes. But is there a story, of an example that just reinforces how much we have to educate? That if you can think of one, I can think of one that blew my mind once. I was talking to someone on a key committee. Okay, it was not called Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities, so it's a few years ago, right?
Yep.
It might even be 20 years ago, and the person had no idea we were on our issues were part of their committee. And admittedly, it was a big committee, and
Right.
It wasn't the chairman, obviously, and it wasn't the vice chairman. All right. They were very capable people. And it might even been in right after Paul Colios, who had been chair of that committee, and Human Services Committee, I think is what it was called. And so it was a mind blower for me, and let me go, and then that person was in a hurry. I said, well, let's reschedule then so we can have a little bit of time, and those were the days you tried to press the whole committee,
Right.
Which is hard to do, right? Because there's so many committees that respond to our concerns or affect our concerns. Anyway, I don't know if either of you have a story, or it's just somebody who maybe hadn't even met someone with a disability.
Not so much, I don't so much have that story, but a recent story where I felt like I was really between a rock and a hard place was advocating about those folks who have been left home since the pandemic because of our workforce shortage crisis. And honestly, I think it's the legislature has to hear our stories. They have to be open to listening to the stories, because there was just sort of a block around what it's like to be home for 3 years with someone who's used to having a lot of structure and a lot of support in their life, and what that means on the family. So I felt like I was having a really hard time getting through on that, because the person was talking about all the issues of people, the lack of education supports right now and the workforce issues all over. And I agree, I am biased that ours are some of the most challenging. But yeah, I think without having that time to really take in and listen to the stories of what life is like right now, it's going to be hard to get through. Why we need those Chapter 257 increases and, more focus on the workforce, human services in general.
Yeah.
Certain, there are individual stories that do come to mind, Leo, but, more broad. There sometimes is, ignorance around some legislators who just, maybe they've just never experienced a relationship with someone on the autism spectrum, someone with Down syndrome. So they or parents of young kids with IDD. And so they've just never experienced those challenges. And that can be very, disappointing.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think the ARC does really, really well is to try to educate their families to reach out to their lawmaker and, create a relationship, get to know them, and more importantly, get to have that lawmaker know your family so that when issues come up, they're not blindsided, right? They're not ignorant to the issues you're facing, that they're aware that there are serious challenges in the workforce, that there are really challenges on transportation or aging out and turning 22. It's really, really important.
Yeah, and both of you really highlight the relational aspect that, and I do feel COVID's had an impact on families and individuals being able to do that. So that's something we should probably remind people.
Absolutely. I can speak to one story, and I'm not going to say the person's name.
No, of course not.
But when I first filed the higher education bill,
That's good.
over 10 years ago, somebody came into my office, closed the door, and asked me not to file the bill. And I assumed it was, oh, well, maybe they want to file it. So, I don't want to get into that, this is great. If you want to file it, that's great. We can do it together. And the person sat down and said, please don't file this bill because you are going to hurt a general education for a student in college. You're going to weaken, you're going to weaken their college experience. And have you ever been told something and it just creates like numbness, like someone just took a 2x4 and hit you with it? That's what it felt like, because I was just totally shocked by that ignorance, that looking that this bill was going to somehow bring everyone down to the lowest common denominator, which is what I was certainly not the way I was looking at the bill. I was looking at a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah.
And it was really mind-boggling to me. And it was really sad and it was really disappointing. And I just stopped and I asked the person to leave because I just wasn't going to, be in the company of that kind of ignorance. But it still exists.
Yes.
And that's why it's so critical, the roles that you all play.
Yeah, and that's a reminder for all of us. And Haran just wrote, wow, that's shocking. And because it reminds us that people out, you hope they're not a rep or a senator. But there are people who I remember when we were advocating for more taxes some years ago, one of the people in our extended family said to my wife, well, that's going to mean more taxes, because we were talking about a key issue, right, that we were advocating for. There was going to be financially a big sum, and said, well, that could trigger more taxes. And then some years later, that person had a friend whose son needed substance abuse treatment, and their thinking about taxes changed. And I thought about that, and we know, right, like with all this behavioral health stuff that's going up now, the emergency centers to hopefully also impact boarding if they can learn to work with our folks as well. that all was there, you know, in the 80s and late 70s. And it was dismantled, the community mental health center system, right? And the emergency systems were made like really pared down, you know? And substance abuse treatment programs were totally pared down. I remember Steve Tolman as senator really fighting, you know, during the Romney administration to maintain some of those. And yeah, you were going to say something more. I'm
No,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that explicit bias that we run into is something we can address head on, but it's the implicit bias that is the more difficult ones for us. That's really changing attitudes across our culture, across our society. And that takes a lot of work from everyone, but the implicit bias is holding us back on workforce funding and
Healthcare.
getting all of these bills prioritized and all of those things. So it is, again, it comes back a lot to the relationships. And
Well, I was thinking about like that story of that person who was in your office and the inability of him or her to appreciate, you know, the true meaning of that, right? And yes, it's explicit bias, but you had the ability internally, your self-concept and your you know, strength, you know, to face that right down. I think sometimes with our families, if we haven't coached them enough or encouraged them enough, they're in a situation like that, maybe not that blatant, right? Maybe it's more, they're getting sort of a bland feedback, right? And they're unable to then deliver in a way, right? So for those of you listening today, like that's something we can help each other with. Okay, to feel assertive, to feel politely assertive, by the way, you know, we don't have to be aggressive or rude, but sometimes we do, I guess, if the situation warrants it. But as a rule, we want to be politely assertive. And, you know, but that's something we have to also be ready for that, you know, and not be shy about it. And I think about that a lot, where people have been sort of worn down, right? And they've been, you know, they call an area office, they need help. Well, I told you there's a workforce crisis, you know, and we gave you, you know, money for 14 hours a week. Isn't that enough, you know? And no, guess what? It isn't enough, you know, and my son or daughter's been isolated. I'm exhausted, you know, whatever there might be. And they might not even be exhausted. It just might be the isolation, right? That's the issue.
Yeah. It's scary when our beloved ones, right, our population gets treated less than human, and that's what, you know, happened in this case, and that is certainly what happened in, you know, why we did the Commission on State Institutions, to learn the history. And I will tell you, since the governor signed that into law, I've received dozens of phone calls from people who want to tell their story, who felt like they've never been able to share their story. And I think that will go a long way to righting this ship in many ways.
That's great. So the commission can do that. We can help the commission too with if some help's needed on that as well, getting interviewing and those kinds of things. That'd be great. So if you were to predict, like, you know, each session has their big issues, right? I don't know if it's good to predict or for you to share a little bit with people listening. What were the issues, 3 or 4 big issues that were there, right, in the ozone this time around? And what do you see going into the coming year that affect what we do, right? That are going to be in our way in a way, even though we care about those big issues too, the economy, we care about transportation, we care about education. What do you think will be out there?
No, it's a great question, Leo, and I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. So, you know, a lot of things we will take up that we may not even be aware of. You know, the speaker will lay out, I am sure, an ambitious agenda as we swear in the new class of reps coming before us, and we will tackle a lot of important issues, and we certainly will be working closely with the Healy administration, as the governor-elect will address her priorities as well, and we'll work together to pass really meaningful legislation. Some of the issues that have been percolating during the campaign during last session that I think will be addressed in some way in the upcoming session, certainly in the area of, public transportation. I would believe that we're going to do another climate bill.
Okay.
I would imagine we're going to take up, pieces of the economic development bill that we weren't able to get passed this session. And, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to take up a lot of important legislation to the Arc of Massachusetts. To me, the hospital training bill is something that needs to get done. You should never have an individual with disabilities or autism walk into a healthcare facility and literally get turned away. And that is what happened on the North Shore, which resulted in an individual's death. Right, Maura? So that should never have happened.
No, and this is a great bill, Rep. So I'm so happy that you're thinking about top priority for it. I had heard something about a potential healthcare more omnibus bill coming out earlier this session, because you didn't do one last session. There was no big healthcare bill. So in hopes that, we would have two opportunities to push our bill, but then potentially put the language of that bill into a bigger bill. If people don't know what that bill does, it sets standards of care for people with autism and IDD, and it sets up a committee that would develop continuing ed credits for all hospital professionals. Just so needed. And Sean Garballey mentioned the incident at the Beverly Hospital, actually, and it was all about training. It was just really unaware clinical staff. So thank you.
Yeah, the gentleman ended up, if I remember right, getting lost, right? He was discharged.
Well, yeah, discharged with, no
without any
supports.
support, right? And just sort of sad. Yeah. So that sounds, pretty challenging session. I have, I just want to point out, Brianna just wrote, the higher ed bill is also not totally shocking given the history of ableism that permeates higher education.
Looks like a good link.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Brianna. Thank you. So one of the things, it's a crazy idea, but I know the speaker's very deliberate, and so is the Senate president. But we have some bills that have been vetted, as you said, right? And it's actually probably like 5 of them, SDM being an example, the records bill, actually there's a couple of cross disability bills around accessibility that haven't made it, that our friends have pushed big time, that we will have on our platform again. I'm really not sure what it's got to do with buildings that are older, that are able to get past the architectural access boards. There's the Operation House Call stuff, which, we just got, thank God, a $10,000 donation for the program, but it's really, there's not one healthcare settings. The one that was able to pay full price had a grant, and was able to do that, but sort of the gold standard thing, the extending to dehabilitation, the registry bill, which, is not a huge move to make,
Everybody gotta jump off. Sorry, Leo.
All right, talk to you
Happy
later.
holidays.
Maura.
Thanks, Maura.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
And we have Katie's Law, which is definitional. And I know we had to attest, as did another organization, that there was no entitlements built into that. That was originally Kate Kahn's bill around archaic language.
Right.
And Chairman Finn had to have staff go through it after all of that. And it looks like it's so complex, even though it's a very simple bill. So there's several bills. Do you think there's any chance at all that some of those bills that have been vetted wouldn't have to go through the traditional, because it could take months, right, to go through committee hearings? So you basically go through a year, whereas there's other bills sometimes, especially the big ones that you've been negotiating, that might get an earlier call up, right?
Well, my hope would be, and I think Katie's Law is a great example of that. I've talked extensively with Chair Finn, and their committee has vetted that bill, unbelievably efficiently. And that bill is absolutely ready to go. Absolutely ready to go. It can be passed today, and they are confident with the changes that they made to it, that it is ready to go. So my hope would be, and the speaker has done this in the past, and that is, when bills get fully vetted, that, early in the session, that committees take the bills that are ready to go early on in the session. I think that's really, really important. And that's what I'm going to hope for my DPPC bill, my hospital training bill. There's a lot of these that have been around for a long time that have been fully vetted. So my hope, Leo, is yes, but obviously I'm one rep out of 200. So I don't make the decisions, but, certainly you have a lot of reps and senators in the building on your side who will certainly be advocating to leadership that is the way that we should conduct business in the new session.
Great. I'm wondering if, in terms of the folks like some of your colleagues, Jim O'Day and some other folks, right? Denise Garlick, to some extent, Josh Cutler. I don't know how much Rep. Coppinger has been involved in terms of some of this stuff, but probably we could do a better job, with some others out there, getting them involved. But what I'd love to have the folks on the call appreciate, if they know their representative and senator personally, that is, thank you. If you don't, can't encourage it enough to make that personal connection, because it does really register. And we do want to get past the bias, and I wonder if there's any other folks on the line that want to ask a question. Put it in the chat though, because I'm going to pick what questions he gets. So feel free, but I'm going to ask you about, out of all the things, turning 22 and the waiting list and the healthcare work you've done, and the recent bills we just discussed, what do you think stands out in your mind? And I know you said how the higher ed thing was huge because of the decade, right, of you hanging in there, and keep nudging it along. What do you think the most compelling issue is that's left on the table right now that you think, regardless of whether it has a chance or not, from your perspective as rep, out of the issues you've been supporting?
Well, speaking with families across the Commonwealth, it has to be the waiting list. There are just too many young people or older people not being served. The waiting list is just so long. I have, a constituent who's in a group home who, in the past year has gained about 50 pounds.
Wow.
And it's just not making progress and is in many ways going backwards because there's nowhere for him to go during the day. And that's scary. That's scary for an individual. That's scary for the family of that individual. To me, at least in the short term, now it's not a bill, right?
Right,
so
right.
There are other important bills we have to pass, but we have to figure out a way to hold DDS accountable, right? Give them the tools necessary to get people back to work, or, we've tried to address, it's not nearly as much as I think that workers deserve in the rate reserve for 257, but we need to come together and try to figure out a way to shorten that wait list, because I think that really, I don't know if you would agree, Leo, but there's a lot of important issues, but I think for at least from my perspective, this is the most important one.
I totally am with you. And we've had several meetings with the administration, and we actually would raise this early in COVID, even about getting the virus protection. And we'd say there's the system, right? People that are in the service system, and then there's people that are outside. In this case, though, the example you just gave, example of someone in the service system in a group setting, and they're isolated, it has an unbelievable impact on them as well. So it's not just the people at home with family that are experiencing this. It's folks that may be in a group home setting who are still isolated because they're not being readmitted. And Mass Health just is a piece of this too, because of the day habilitation program So, and we just had a meeting Friday again on this topic. We're hopefully made some progress in that they will be identifying names and individuals internally to work on. And then basically what we had been asking for is, could area offices, family support agencies, AFC programs, can't they like collaborate locally to do local
Right.
problem solving and figure out other ways, you know, to address the problem so people aren't isolated? And then we do have people who are still trying to get back to work that haven't been able to work, parents. So no, I think you're right. I think it's the most compelling thing that's out there right now. And I'm so glad you mentioned that instead of a bill, because and we want to come back to the legislature. We did. The legislature had language in the DDS budget, and maybe our mistake was probably should have had in the mass health budget too, but mass health is an entitlement. So I wasn't as worried about that. But there's language about a bridge to the future and addressing people. So, I mean, the legislature was very much in tune with that. And House Ways and Means had the language. The Senate had a little bit of different language, but then they put it together. And so we will be coming to the legislature to say, hey, help if we don't make progress within 8 weeks, you know, in terms of seeing some concrete things, we'll be coming to you anyway. I mean, we did, right, you know, and see what's realistic. So it's almost the end of the session time. I just want to say again how much I appreciate everything you've been doing, Rep. Garballey, and I just want the people to know that it makes a difference. One thing, we plan to do besides the orientation is Barbara Italian suggested today, she's at DLC Disability Law Center, that we could do bill signing day like we used to do.
That's
where
great.
bill sponsors, right, can whether they're able to physically be there, hopefully they can be there, but we would get reps and senators to come in to co-sponsor bills that are filed. So maybe like the third week in January, you know, to have that set up. And it
That's
would
a
be
great
like,
idea.
right, like a floating thing we used to do. Barbara was surprised that we hadn't done it in 2 or 3 years, but of course we had COVID too, so it's tough to physically have a bill signing day. But we'll have our first legislative reception. I think it's on a Tuesday. I think that's March 7th, back in the building. So that'll be a big deal with the Mass DD Council as well.
Yeah, and I have to
So-
figure out what I'm going to be filing on your behalf this session.
Exactly.
Figure that
Yeah,
out.
I don't know if it's been sorted out, if we sorted out the registry expansion thing, you know? I know you were helpful on it, but we didn't, I don't think we had, for whatever reason, House sponsor last session on it. And our goal was to get it through the Senate and then get it to the House. And I think the person that was helping was Rep. Dykma before she
Right.
stepped down.
Yep.
Lori Medeiros just said, Mass Families thanks you too. And I would assume you're probably familiar with Lori.
Oh, we love Lori. She's an
Yeah.
incredible advocate on a whole host of issues.
She is. She's wonderful. So, and she's one of those people that's hanging in there, you know, and she's always a cup half full person. I just really appreciate her, and, you know, and others on the call as well. So I just want to thank you for being with us. Wasn't too painful. It's your third appearance, and I don't know, probably 4 months between Maura and I, right? I think.
It's great to be on with you, Leo. And, you know, I just appreciate being in a virtual room with so many passionate, dedicated, hardworking people. So we'll continue on to the next session. And I'm just really looking forward to continuing our partnership and our collaboration as we head into the next term.
Great. Really appreciate you. Thank you. And for
Happy
folks-
holidays, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. This is the last session for this year. So, you know, happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, happy Kwanzaa. And if I'm missing a holiday, someone correct me on the chat. But really appreciate all of you. We'll be coming back in the new year. And we also are going to be shifting, as I said, probably in February, to having once a month and then some podcasts. So we look forward to keeping it up and keeping the information flow going. Thanks again. Have a great holidays, Rep. Garballey, and everybody else on this call. We're going to miss you for a few weeks. See you on the other side. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.